Okay. So last week we started, it was the week one of the new 4-week class here. And we started by kind of mixing the history of the beginning of the country with, uh, with the civics and the government, right? Because I think to understand the government that we have, you kind of have to understand the historical context of it. Why did those people back in the 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. Then they wrote the Constitution 1787. It was ratified in 1789. So why did they design the government that we have? You know, they sat in a room. It was it was all men representing all the different states, and they came up with these ideas, this form of government, the three branches, the checks and balances that we're going to talk about today. And why? And so to understand why, you kind of have to look at them historically and say, well, the one, as I always say, the one thing they knew was that they didn't want a king. They didn't want too much power being in one person's hands. So they spread out the power across three branches of government, with each with their own roles, checks and balances to make those roles balance each other, to check each other's power, to balance out the power, spread out the power among a lot of different people, a lot of different decisions. And so that's what we did last week. So then we ended up, we talked through, we talked about the legislative branch, right? The two houses of Congress, and how each of those, the two houses in Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, have different roles. The Senate is the more important, you know, frankly, the more powerful. They end up doing a lot more that affects us more directly. But they can't operate with, they can't pass laws without the House of Representatives. So they work hand in hand. Today we're going to jump right in with the executive branch. Okay, so Nadia, this is a diagram of the executive branch. Okay, well, actually, it's the whole government, really. At the top, we have the Constitution, and then let me ask you: as I move my mouse on the screen, do you guys see my mouse moving?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because I point to stuff all the time, so I don't know if I just want to make sure you guys see that. Um, and then we have the legislative branch. This is pretty small stuff here. The legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. Now, the legislative branch says Congress, the Senate, and the House, and there's a couple of small offices that help the legislative branch do its job. The Congressional Budget Office, the Library of Congress is there. The United States Botanic Garden, okay, which is great, but that's not, you know, doesn't affect our daily lives. The judicial branch is pretty sweeping. It's the Supreme Court is at the top. You have Court of Appeals, district courts, territorial courts, a bunch of courts. Federal Judicial Center, and then some offices that help them, to help the court system do its job. The rest of this diagram, the middle big box, and then all these little boxes underneath, are the executive branch. There are, I think I've read like the statistic, there's like 2 million people that work in the executive branch. You think of the executive branch as the president, but it's the president, what we say is the president and his cabinet, but it's also all these departments, and in the Department of Justice, or in the Department of Transportation, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Homeland Security. There's literally millions of people that work in those branches, in those offices, and in you know, when we say an office, we don't mean just one little office building. It's a sprawling organization. And then there's all these other things at the bottom that are labeled independent establishments and government corporations. The Federal Trade Commission works a lot with trade and the economy. Export-Import Bank of the United States, National Science Foundation, National Railroad Passenger Corporation, which is Amtrak, the trains. When you're riding on an Amtrak train, you're riding on essentially a government train. The Peace Corps, Social Security Administration. If you know anybody who receives Social Security, that's through the government. That's the executive branch. Okay, so you have these three branches of government. The executive branch is the president and his cabinet, but that represents all these other offices and groups and organizations. Okay. Now, who is the cabinet? What is the president's cabinet?
Secretaries of each department.
Right. It's the secretary, the top person, the secretary of each of these departments. Department of Agriculture, Department of the Interior, Commerce, Justice, Defense, Labor, Department of State, Education. Okay. All I could read the whole thing across. So, when the president has a cabinet meeting, which happens every so often, sometimes sometimes they have the press in there, they take pictures or video. Sometimes it's a closed door meeting and they meet without the press, the media. When he has a cabinet meeting, it's the secretary, the top person of all those groups. Also, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the representatives of the military. The Attorney General is a member of the cabinet. And it's really up to the president to label who's part of the cabinet. But it's like his inner circle of advisors, okay? Most of whom are running all these categories, all these offices, departments, okay? They're executive departments. And so that's the president and his cabinet. That's the executive branch. Let's look at the constitutional duties of the president. Okay, now this is what the Constitution says. Now the Constitution is the law of the land. It's the ultimate law. Can only be changed by an amendment, right? Which is a very difficult thing to do, a constitutional amendment. But it is up to us and the court system when there's a disagreement to define what these things mean. Because the Constitution, as we saw last week, I hope, is not an impossible to read document. It's not even terribly long. I mean, it's long, but it's not like 1,000,000 pages long that you might think it might be. It doesn't cover every detail. So some of these things that are listed for the president in the Constitution are pretty vague. Now that's because, back we're talking 1787, they're writing this document, and they didn't need to. They were just kind of laying out, inventing a new government. They weren't working out every single detail. But it says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Okay, this is a new thing they were creating, a president. No country before this, as far as I understand, there was not a president of a country. They invented the term and they invented the office, the job. It was a new thing that they invented. It's not a king, it's not an emperor, it's a president at the top of the executive branch. The president shall be the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy, okay, which we still understand today. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties. So checks and balances, we're going to look at that in a minute. With the advice and the consent of the Senate, he makes treaties. He shall nominate and, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court. Okay, and we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and how that's in the news right now. He shall, from time to time, give to Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. From that, we get our modern State of the Union address that the president gives to both houses of Congress. And they're all sitting in the House chamber in the Capitol building. And he gives every January, the president gives the State of the Union address. Now that was very different in the 1780s and 90s and in the 1800s. Today, especially with Donald Trump using Twitter so much, everybody knows what the president's thinking, and even with President Obama before, everybody knows what the president's thinking. But back then, think of the world back then when they wrote this, they felt the need to put it in the Constitution that he shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the State of the Union. The president can't ignore Congress. They have to communicate, and he can recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. So that tells you a little bit of something about how they thought this might work. They were afraid that maybe the president would never talk to Congress, that they wouldn't work hand in hand. Of course, today they don't do anything without each other. And number 6, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So this is what the Constitution says, the explicit duties of the president in the Constitution. Okay. So the executive branch, if the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch executes the laws or enforces the laws. Okay. One power that we saw that was given to the House of Representatives, and really it's shared between the House of Representatives and the Senate, is initiates all revenue bills. We say that the Congress has the power of the purse. They hold the money. They decide how the money, the nation's tax dollars, money, is going to be spent. Right? We're going to give this much to the military. We're going to give this much to Social Security. We're going to give this much to different, education. Okay, just to keep it really simple. They decide how many billions of dollars get spent here or here or here. Okay, that's Congress's job. The president then takes that allocation of money and says, okay, Department of Education, you've been given, $10 billion. Here's how we're going to use it. So if the legislative branch divvies up the money, spreads out the money, decides how it's going to be spent or where it's going to be spent, the executive branch then spends that money, right? We give a huge amount of money to defense, the military. So it's the Department of Defense here that then goes and is the military, runs the wars, pays the soldiers, buys the material. So that's the checks and balances. The president, as the president can't say, oh, the military needs 10 million more dollars. He can't just make it happen. He can go to Congress and say, I need you to pass a new budget bill that gives the military more money. And, generally they're going to do that. But it's not his decision to make it happen. Okay. So that's an interesting checks and balances on how money gets spent. Okay. All right, let's talk about the judicial branch. We have at the top right, we have the Supreme Court building. The Supreme Court is the pinnacle, if it's a pyramid, it's the pinnacle of the judicial system. Underneath that is a system of, we see 94 federal district courts. Pennsylvania has 3 separate courts, district courts. There's 13 federal circuit courts. Okay, and then there's lots of courts across the country that are federal systems. So there's a whole system of courts underneath the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court's going to hear the cases that are from those lower courts that get appealed upwards through the system. So let's say you feel your First Amendment rights have been wronged. Okay. You can sue to I should have a better example here, but let's just say you're in some federal court system. If you lose, you can always appeal, or if you win, the other side can always appeal, right? So they're going to appeal, and you go to the next higher court in the ladder. And if you go up a couple of rungs in the ladder, you get to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court is asked to see about 1,000 cases a year. They accept about 100 cases a year. And they're not retrying the cases. They're not calling witnesses. They are kind of just looking over. Most of the time they'll call in the lawyers to represent each side, but they'll just question. By that point, all the information is known. Right? This isn't a car crash. This isn't a bank robbery where we need to find out who the robber is. all the information is known. Their job is to weigh a very difficult decision. So they're going to talk to the lawyers representing each side, and these are some, big time lawyers who go up in front of the Supreme Court, and then they don't decide right then and there. They generally have periods where they'll hear all the cases, and then they'll take a month and they'll write the opinions and make the decisions on those cases. It's a system, and then all the cases come out and it's in the news every day. They like spill out a couple of case decisions, and then we talk about those for a few days, and then there's a few more and we talk about those ones. So it's kind of like this rhythm that they have in the Supreme Court. What is going on right now with the Supreme Court? Let's talk current events. What's going on right now with the Supreme Court?
Actually, I have no idea because I stay away of almost all news now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not the best citizen now.
Well, I mean, the news, there's a lot of it, and not, very little of it is happy. Okay, Tusajigwe, Jandai, do you know what's going on with the Supreme Court? It was about a month ago, I think about a month ago, that that Ruth Bader Ginsburg here, the tiny little lady on the right in the front row, she passed away. It wasn't totally a surprise. She was 87. She's had cancer like 4 times. She passed away. It was on a Friday night, I think about a month ago. Well, the president, as is the president's duty, it says there, constitutional duty, to nominate, with the advice and consent of the Senate, the judge of the Supreme Court. So Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies. He then, I think a week or 2 later, nominated somebody. And now that woman, he nominated a woman to replace a woman, and that's a good thing. She is now sitting in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Right? Just some of the senators. I don't know how many senators are on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And they're doing 3 or 4 days. I think today's the 4th day, I think. It was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I think today as well. They interview her for like 11 hours. One day it was like 11 hours straight. And it's all televised, and the media is there and the news is there. And their job as the Senate Judiciary Committee is to gather information, question her, and decide if she is the right person for the job. Then they will make a recommendation to the larger Senate. And I think I saw a headline today that the Senate has set a date to vote on this woman. Her name is Amy Coney Barrett. They will vote on her on, I think it's October 22nd. So next week, I think that's what I saw. But they plan to vote her onto the Supreme Court before election day. So that's what's going on. She would be Donald Trump's 3rd justice on the Supreme Court that he's nominated. Okay, he did one very quickly after his election in 2017, and then another one in 2018, and now this one in 2020. So this would be the 3rd justice on the Supreme Court that he's nominated. And I believe that it seems like this one today will be approved by the Senate. It's the Senate's job to make that decision, though. So it's the checks and balances. The president can't just nominate somebody and give the person a job. That's not his job in this process. He nominates somebody, and then the Senate gives them the thumbs up or thumbs down. So it's the checks and balances. As you see, 9 justices with 1 Chief Justice, John Roberts. Chief Justice Roberts is sitting in the middle. They're appointed for life. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died in office. Sometimes they'll retire, but they serve for life. What is the purpose of them serving for life. They never have to run for re-election. What would be the purpose of that?
I believe you said something about more like their views and almost like loyalty based off of who means that they do not have to be reelected. They don't have a connection with like a political party because they serve for life. So they're not serving under one president or one party. They're serving for life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They are then free to make their own decisions. And if over time, and these people sometimes serve for 20, 30 years, if as the world changes and things change and sometimes their opinions and their views on things can change. A conservative justice can make decisions or side with decisions that become more and more liberal, and sometimes they do shift their ideologies a little bit. They're not worrying about re-election. They don't have to worry, does this decision I'm going to make please people? Their number one consideration is, their understanding of the Constitution. So it says, through the process of judicial review of the laws, the court has the authority to interpret the Constitution and can declare a law or government action unconstitutional if it violates the spirit of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution can be pretty difficult to determine sometimes. And so they differ, right? They vote. There's 9. So there's an odd number so that there's not a tie. They hear a case and then they vote on it. And so, you'll hear about a 5-4 decision or a 6-3 decision. Very rarely is there a unanimous 9-0 decision on the Supreme Court because they have differing views. Even of something as foundational as the Constitution, they have differing views on what the Constitution means. And of course, they're looking at all the different court cases that have ever happened. And these people are obviously much smarter than I am. And they're taking into consideration a lot of things, but none of their considerations we hope, does my decision make people happy, right? Do I need to keep people happy in order to be reelected? That's not a possibility. So it doesn't enter into their conversation or their decision-making process, which is a smart thing, I think, for those founding fathers to build into it, right? So here we have the checks and balances. One of the powers in yellow of the judicial branch is judges appointed by the president serve for life. That controls the power of the president. If the president could appoint somebody and then remove them, then that would take away some power from the judicial branch. But since they serve for life, they can be impeached, just like a president can be impeached and removed from office. If a judge did something that proved to be egregious or unconstitutional, I don't know of a time that a Supreme Court justice has ever been impeached. So they serve for life, and what they say is the law of the land. So here's the different ways that each of the 3 branches controls the power, balances the power up from the other branch. Let's see, the legislative branch controlling the executive. They can override a presidential veto if a president so if the legislative branch passes a law, the president can veto it. But then it goes back to the legislative branch, it goes back to Congress. And if they can override the veto with a 2/3 majority vote, a very high bar, right? 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate need to agree to it. But if that many people agree, then they can override the president's veto. So that's a checks and balance. They can turn down the president. They can say no to a presidential appointment. They can impeach and remove the president from office. So there's all these different, you see all the different arrows. The 3 branches of government share a lot of duties in order to get something done, the three branches have to, or at least two of the branches are always working in, there's basically a dance. Like they do something and then I do something and then you do something and then I do something. So that's how it gets done in order to prevent abuse of power or the concentration of power in one branch of the government or in one person's hand. Okay, checks and balances is central to our government. The way it was designed on purpose is it has these interlocking pieces. The judicial branch can't do certain things. They don't get to this, when a Supreme Court justice dies, it's not the judicial branch who then puts in its own person. It's the executive branch and legislative branch that share that power. So they're always doing stuff together, and that's the way it was designed to work. Doesn't always work perfectly because people aren't always perfect, but it's the way it's designed to happen. Okay. Any questions on the three branches of government and the checks and balances and stuff? No? Okay. Let's look at this. Okay, now Nadia, this is new to you. So let's see if we can make sense of this. This is a good graphic to practice on because, when you take that social studies test and science, there's going to be graphics on it on the social studies GED or high set test. And this is kind of a crazy thing. So, but first we look at the title. It says election results from 1788 to 2012 showing percentage of popular vote. So that's the title. We see up the top, the vertical axis, we have percentage. Okay, so that's percentage of popular vote. All right, that's just the number of people in the country as a whole who voted for that president. Across the bottom, we see different years. Okay, every bar is a year. Now, what do the different colors represent?
Political parties.
Yeah, different political parties.
Yeah.
Okay. George Washington did not belong to a political party. At the time, they didn't really have political parties. But then by the end of Washington's second term, a couple of parties, they were the Democratic, Republican, and the Federalists, Jefferson and Adams. They were political parties like we would think of political parties were starting to form, and Washington didn't like it. In George Washington's farewell address in leaving office for his second term, his warning was, be careful of these political parties that are running, because people are going to focus too much on the political party and not think for themselves. And that was his big warning. And a lot of people would agree that's political parties are good because they, you can get a lot done, but sometimes people stop thinking for themselves. Okay. So we see we have a line at 50% of the popular vote. The name in each year is the name of the winner. Okay. It doesn't tell us who the losers were, but we do know their political party. Okay. So let's look at something where we might be familiar with. Now 2016 isn't on here. Donald Trump isn't on here. We have two terms of Barack Obama in blue being Democratic, red is Republican. And in the news, those are the colors. I don't know how that was ever decided, but those are the colors. Democrats are represented in blue, Republicans are red. So if you hear about blue states and red states, as we're going to talk about in a minute, that's what that means. Blue is Democratic, red is Republican. So Obama won, where's my mouse? Obama won those 2 years. He had over 50% of the popular vote. George W. Bush in 2000, you compare the red to the blue. The blue is closer to 50%. George W. Bush had less of the popular vote than the losing Al Gore in 2000. So how did George Bush become president in 2000? If he had less votes nationally, national total. He had less votes than Al Gore in 2000. How did George Bush become president?
About the votes of the Electoral College.
Yeah. Nadia, what did you say?
Yeah, I wanted to say the same.
Yeah, the Electoral College. So that's what we're going to look at next. The Electoral College. Okay. Now, for anybody voting this year, it's an election year. It's an important thing to understand, super important. As we grow up, we're kids, we're told, the winner of the election is the person with the most votes. That is not the case exactly in the presidential election. This is only a system that exists only for electing the president of the United States. It's not how senators work or representatives. No other country, I can't say no other country, but the Electoral College is only for electing the president. Okay, so it says the popular vote within each state decides who that state's electors will vote for. Okay,
Now,
so
I remember. Now I remember we did this with Mr. Rick. We learned about how many electoral colleges there are in each state of America.
okay, yeah. Because my number 2 point is each state has a number of electors equal to their number of senators and members of Congress. Now, Pennsylvania, we live in a pretty populous state. Pennsylvania has a lot of people in it, mainly because of our 2 big cities, Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania, or Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But if you look at the numbers, Pennsylvania is like tied for 5th for biggest electoral college state. You have California has 55, Texas has 38, New York has 29, right? There's a lot of people in those places. Florida also has 29. So there's 4 that have more than us. And then Illinois and Pennsylvania have 20. So if you are Donald Trump or Joe Biden, you really want to win Pennsylvania. There's a lot of electoral college votes. Okay, so we will vote. I plan to vote on election day and cast my ballot for somebody. That will go into a big pot of Pennsylvania votes across Pennsylvania, cities, middle of the state, rural, the whole state as a whole. All the votes go into one pot, and then the winner there, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, will get all of Pennsylvania's 20 electoral college votes. Okay, same thing happens in every state. Now, if you live in Montana, I always pick on these states out west that have 3 electoral college votes. The North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana. There's just not a lot of people out there. So they have 2 senators and they have 1 representative in the House of Representatives. So that means there's 3. They only get 3 electoral college votes. That's why you almost never see, if you live in Wyoming, Donald Trump's not holding rallies in Wyoming, because if you had to pick, we're 3 weeks away from the election. If you're going to spend your time in Wyoming or Pennsylvania, you better believe he's going to spend his time in Pennsylvania to get 20 votes instead of 3, right? So that's how the Electoral College works. Now let's look at Trump versus Hillary Clinton in 2016. Here's the Electoral College on the right-hand side. The blue states went for Hillary Clinton. The red states went for Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton gets California. California is very heavily Democratic. So, Democrats always count on getting California, which is big, 55 electoral college votes. To win, you need 270. That's why I got this graphic from the website, 270 to win. If you get over 270, 269 would be a tie, 269 to 269. Okay, when that happens, it's like there's a plan for it, but it's this whole other thing. And it goes to the House of Representatives and it gets real crazy. But so to win the Electoral College, you need 270 votes to win. In 2016, Donald Trump won 306 because you take all these red states, you add them up, and he got 306. Okay. So the only state that divides, that is not a winner take all, is Maine, and that's why Maine is red and blue in this map. Every other state is they vote, and the winner of that state gets all the electoral college votes for that state. Maine, I don't know why they do it differently, but nobody cares about Maine because it's only 4 electoral college votes anyway, so not that big of a deal. Okay, so the electoral college emphasizes some states over others, right? If you live in Wyoming, you're probably never going to go to a Trump rally because, you know, I mean, I can't say for certain, but like he's just never going to go there because those votes aren't as powerful as some other votes in bigger, more populous, more electoral college vote states. Okay, so that's the electoral college. It's weird. A lot of people say it's outdated. Some people, even at the time when they came up with this idea back in the 1780s, people said, no, that's weird. But there's a reason for it. You know, and historians say, well, those reasons have changed. The country has changed. The population has shifted around. And you can make all kinds of arguments for it and against it. Okay. Any questions on how that works? Nadia, does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm not sure I got it really correctly.
Well, you know, across the country on November 3rd, America will vote. People now, of course, there's also this year, there's mail-in ballots and there's early voting that's going on right now. I think I saw somewhere that 15 million Americans have already voted. But, you know, if we say just November 3rd, we say election day, let's pretend that on election day, we all go to vote. And if, you know, and it's state by state. Now they will they keep track of the nation's votes. Like for instance, in 2016, Hillary Clinton received about 3 million more votes across the country than Donald Trump. She won the popular election by 3 million votes, but the popular election, the country as a whole, doesn't matter. All that matters is each state. And it's then this map, the red and the blue map, is super important. That's how that works. And if you look back on electoral college maps, and you can, through the years, and you look back every 4 years, the maps change. Pennsylvania hasn't always voted Republican. It was a surprise in 2016 because Pennsylvania, for the 2 elections that got Barack Obama in office, I believe, Pennsylvania had voted for the Democrat, Barack Obama, and had voted Democrat for the Democratic candidate for a while. So it was a surprise when Pennsylvania went for Republican Donald Trump in 2016. Other states there are enough Democrats in California that Donald Trump's not really planning to win California. He's giving it up. He's saying, well, you know what? There's not enough Republican voters in California for me to worry about it. I don't have a chance to win there. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to have my rallies somewhere else. Other states, we call them swing states, could go either way. You know, Pennsylvania this time could go for Trump, could go for Biden. You know, those swing states that could swing in either direction to either candidate, those become the really important states. Okay, especially Pennsylvania that has 20, you know, we're tied for fifth biggest state, has 20 electoral college votes. So it depends. They'll count up all the ballots across the state of Pennsylvania on election night and afterwards, because the mail-in ballots take time. It's going to take time. I don't believe we will know the winner of the election at the end of the election day, as we traditionally do. We might, but I don't think so. But when they feel they have all the ballots and all the votes cast, they'll see who got the most votes in Pennsylvania. and across every state. And then the winner of that state gets the number of electors, the number of electoral college votes for that state. And then it's a math problem. Add up your red states, add up your blue states, and there you go. Whoever has the most wins. Okay.
So, yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
The numbers of these votes, like 20 for Pennsylvania, that it depends of population, right?
Right, because that number is equal to the number of 2 senators and your state's representatives, House of Representatives.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the
And
House of
how
Representatives.
they will decide this, like 20 votes we will give for Republican or for Democrat? Who decide that?
Well, the 20 votes for
These
Pennsylvania.
representatives, yeah, these representatives, senator or who?
Okay, so when we say the electors, Pennsylvania has 20 electors. Those are actual people. Now, I don't know who those are. They'd be like, I think it's kind of a weird system. It is definitely a weird system. But there are 20 electors for Pennsylvania. What we really do is they choose 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats. Now, they're actual people, and they're like high up people, like powerful people in your, maybe your county commissioner or, a person who's in government generally. We never know their names because that's really not important. So what you're doing is when I vote on November 3rd, and I vote for party A or party B, if I say party A, then what I'm doing is I'm signaling to the state of Pennsylvania, I want the 20 electors representing party A to vote for that person for president, right? It's very indirect. We say we're voting for president, but what you're really doing is you're voting for a bunch of 20 electors that represent that party to go vote for that president. Now, it's even weirder because the Electoral College is those people come together, and I think it's like December. It's like December 10th or something. They get together. I don't know. I suppose Washington, D.C. and they hold their election. Now, by that time, we know what will happen because the 20 people representing Pennsylvania, we know how they'll have to vote when they go to that Electoral College, whatever, that meeting, because it's already been determined because of the people voting in Pennsylvania. Whoever, the majority of votes in Pennsylvania have decided who those 20 people will go vote for. It's a very strange system. Does that make any sense?
Yes, but I still did not get who elect these 20 people.
I don't know that.
Because it looks like if candidates knows who are these 20 people, they can just talk to them and try to, I don't know.
True, and that's probably how it used to work, but now there are actual laws that lock in those 20 people. You have, if you're, if I'm a Republican person in my county or a Democratic leader in my county, and I'm involved in the election or whatnot, if I'm a political person and I get, and I get chosen as being one of those 20 electors, I don't then scratch my head and say, who am I going to vote for? I am told who I have to vote for based on the voters in Pennsylvania. So I think back a long time ago, when the founding fathers made this plan, they came up with the idea that, these people will go and they'll make the right decision for America. They're not really deciding. Those 20 electors, and they are real people, they're not deciding who to vote for. They know who they have to vote for based on the votes across Pennsylvania. So it's goofy because, like, why would those people even meet? They don't need to meet because they're not making a decision, right? Each individual is not making a decision on who to vote for. They're just doing a big math problem. 20 plus 18 plus 11 plus 4, you know. Uh, so it's and that's why some people say this whole system is antiquated. It's too old. It may have made sense 200 years ago, but it doesn't make sense today. Other people say, well, this for this reason and this reason, this is why we have to keep it this way. But it's interesting as a historian to look back and say, well, why did they design it this way? What were the problems that they were trying to solve or prevent by creating this kind of odd system? So the Electoral College, that's how it works. Is each state you vote in your state, and then the winner of your state gets all of your electors' votes. And then it's just a math problem. You add up the blue, you add up the red, and whoever gets 270 or higher becomes president. Even if you add up all the country's votes, even if you don't win that popular vote across the country. Because popular vote across the country it does not matter. It's neat to know. It's interesting for us to know that Hillary Clinton received 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but it doesn't matter. And that's kind of weird. And so, Joe Biden, they're talking now, he's up. He has a 10% lead or something over Donald Trump, depending on what day and who you ask. Joe Biden has a 10% lead nationwide if you add up what they think would be all the voters in America. But that doesn't matter. What matters is state by state by state. Who is winning right now in the polls for Pennsylvania and New York and Illinois and North Carolina? Add up those numbers and then you can make a determination about who might win. But just looking at the national total, it's neat to know. It's cool. It's an interesting fact, but it doesn't matter. That's not how we elect the president. So I'm sure, the internet's just bubbling with interesting information about the Electoral College right now. There are great videos. If you just Google, how does the Electoral College work and stuff, there's all kinds of, and the history is interesting. Why did they design it this way? There's always that question. Why? There was people sitting in a room in 1787. Why did they argue and debate and come up with this plan? What was happening? What were they trying to do back then? I think that's an interesting question sometimes. Okay, so let's make a little jump here to history. We've talked about the colonial period, and here's just a timeline. And Nadia, I know you've seen this before. We've looked at it before. Notice how long the British colonial period is. We got 100 years, 150 years of just America wasn't America. It was the British colonies. Then we have the American Revolution. The Constitution passes in 1787. We have the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, we're going to talk about, Reconstruction era, World War I, Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, we've talked a little bit about. I'll include this. I keep this on there. I think it's good. I like to just see things visually sometimes. And here you get to see how long things last. Now, I made this. It's not perfectly accurate, but I tried to make it as good as I can. Different wars, different periods last different lengths of time. But for a very long time, America wasn't a country. It was the British colonies. I think that's important to remember how long they lasted before the American Revolution came and they said, well, we don't like this system anymore. We don't want to be British. Okay. So we know this. We've talked about the Declaration of Independence. I think we can zoom over this a little. Okay. we talked about the Declaration of Independence, what it did. Here's a famous painting. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, the tall guy. Next to him is Benjamin Franklin. I think this short guy is John Adams. Okay, all of these people are actual people. Now, if you lived back then and you knew a lot about the government, maybe you'd be able to recognize all these people. Okay, so here's three definite people we want to know from the American Revolution and the founding era. We have George Washington. He was a general in the Continental Army fighting the British in the Revolutionary War. He's America's first president. And because he was the president, he set a lot of the traditions in government and the presidency. It was up to him to decide a lot of these things. You know, just how would the president be conducted? We don't call, it was his decision. We don't call the president Your Excellency or Your Highness. We call him Mr. President. He's decided, I'm not a king, I'm not an emperor. You're just going to call me Mr. President. And that's what we still do today. Thomas Jefferson was America's third president after John Adams. Jefferson was the main writer of the Declaration of Independence. James Madison, we call the father of the Constitution because he wrote much of the text. Everybody was deciding and debating, but James Madison took a lot of the notes in those meetings, and he wrote quite a lot of the actual Constitution. And he was America's fourth president. Well, you know, now we're into the 1800s. Okay, so after the founding era, after the American Revolution, we have the westward expansion and the period we call Manifest Destiny. So 1803, we get the Louisiana Purchase of land from France in 1803 by President Thomas Jefferson. Louisiana Purchase there, highlighted in green, surrounded in purple. It basically doubles the size of the United States. The original 13 colonies and the states, America in the time of 1803 is here in orange. The gray or blue is territories they were part of America, but not yet states. They were territories. We have Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Mississippi. And then they bought, you know, I forget how many millions of acres of land. They basically double the size of the United States. The rest of this Oregon territory belonged to the British. This light orange is Spain. Okay, and we would fight a few wars to take over Texas and the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, California. We either bought or fought for this land to get from Spain. So the idea of Manifest Destiny is like this famous painting, which was from 1872, so a little bit well into the 1800s. You see this westward expansion. That's kind of the spirit of America. Okay, I don't know why she's always kind of an old Roman. What do you call that? A toga, very classical. Okay, and she's got rope. What is she doing with that? It's not actually rope. What is she doing in this painting?
Is that telegraph wire in her arm?
Yeah. It looks like she has a big bundle of rope, but actually it's telegraph wire. She's laying down telegraph wire. There's also, you see a Conestoga wagon under her feet with horses. Okay, and another one being pulled by ox. They're driving across. Well, you see the railroad also expanding. You see a log cabin. You see farmers. Okay, so this is the American frontier moving westward. Okay, throughout the 1800s, you see, all this land would become states, one by one by one. They become territories and then become states. They're driving in front of them. You see all the bison representing, the wildness of the Great Plains. They're crossing the Rocky Mountains. And of course, the Native Americans are being driven away as the American frontier goes forward across the country. Westward expansion. The idea of manifest destiny is that, well, let's look at this next one. Okay, so we're going to finish after this. We're going to be almost done here. Nadia, could you read, why don't you read the first 2 paragraphs here?
Oh, but I'm sorry, I'm driving now.
Oh, are you driving? Okay, well, then we can read it for you. Jendaya, would you read the first 2 paragraphs?
Sure. After the establishment of the United States government in 1789, the United States steadily acquired land. The new government promoted settlement and expansion south to Florida and west to California. In 1845, editor John L. O'Sullivan coined the phrase manifest destiny. This phrase described what had become a national movement to promote expansion and civilize persons encountered along the way. According to O'Sullivan, the claim to new territory was a right given to Americans by God. He believed that it is a right such as that of the tree to the space of air and earth suitable for the destiny of growth. In the years since, some people have contended that this manifest destiny ideology was a form of racism.
Okay. And then it says, O'Sullivan called on Americans to resist any foreign power that tried to interfere with the, quote, the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence. Providence is God, essentially. O'Sullivan further argued that such God-given favor gave white men the right to bring the benefits of democracy to what he considered more backward people, meaning Mexicans and American Indians, by force if necessary. And we see that in this famous painting. Anytime somebody talks about manifest destiny in a textbook, this painting is always there. The Western culture, or the civilization, they would say, is driving across the country. You know, you have the telegraph, you have the railroad, you have cities and sailing ships behind, you know, you see the bridges, maybe it's New York City, the Brooklyn Bridge or something. That culture is driving across the country. It didn't all belong to the United States at the beginning of the 1800s, but by the end of the 1800s, it does. And you know, it's the frontier being driven across, pushed across the country. They felt it was their manifest destiny. It was America's destiny to go across the whole country. It didn't belong to them at first. You know, when they started the 13 colonies, the 13 states, they're just on the east coast of the Atlantic Ocean. And yet they felt that it was their God-given right to take over the whole width of the continent. So that's manifest destiny. And it's really a period throughout the 1800s. There's a lot else going on, obviously. But throughout the 1800s, it's that westward expansion and manifest destiny idea. Okay. Okay, so we'll stop there. Next week, we'll pick up with the Civil War. And we'll keep pushing on through American history. Okay. Any questions or comments from today?
We're fine.
Okay. Nadia, any questions?
No, thank you. I think I have to watch it over.
Yeah. Okay. Well, after lunch, I will definitely send this out. I'll send this, as always, this PowerPoint. I think I've turned it into a PDF for you. And you can look it over, review. If you want to rewatch the video, you're welcome to. But if you have any questions that you think of, you know, you can always send me an email back and let me know how you're doing. Okay.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.
All right. You too.
Thank you so much.
See ya.
Have a great day. Bye.
You also.
Oh, I can't remember how to turn this off now. All right, guys. Have a good day.